I was working as a travel agent when a young couple came in to plan their honeymoon. They were so excited. "We're staying in Los Angeles for a week," the woman said, "and on Tuesday we want to do a day trip. We'll see the Hollywood sign in the morning, then pop over to the Grand Canyon for the sunset and be back in time for a late dinner in Beverly Hills." I had to gently explain that the Grand Canyon is a 5-hour drive one way, in a different state. She looked genuinely offended and said, "Well, that's just bad design. Why wouldn't they put the canyon closer to a major city?" My company hired a new manager from Florida for our Seattle office. During his first team meeting, he announced a new synergy initiative with our colleagues in Portland. He said, "To kick things off, I want everyone to drive down to the Portland office for a joint lunch meeting this Friday. Be there by noon." There was a dead silence until someone raised their hand and said, "Sir, that's a 3-hour drive." The manager scoffed. "Nonsense," I looked at the map. "Portland, Maine is just up the coast. It can't be more than 45 minutes. We had to explain he was on the wrong side of the country. In my American government class, we were discussing the 3 branches of government. A student raised his hand and with complete confidence asked, "If the president is in Washington, D.C., but Congress is in the Capitol building, how do they communicate? Do they have to fly back and forth between the 2 coasts all the time?" The professor was speechless for a moment, before realizing the student thought the U.S. Capitol building was in Olympia, the capital of Washington state, and that D.C. was a separate entity 3,000 miles away. I had a friend from Texas visiting me in Denver. We were driving and he was looking at the mountains with awe. He said, "Man, the Appalachians are way bigger than I thought they'd be." I corrected him. "These are the Rockies." He argued with me for 10 minutes. His reasoning was, the East Coast has the Appalachians, the West Coast has the Sierras. We're in the middle of the country, so these have to be the Appalachians. The Rockies are much further west, like in California. He was convinced I was the one who was geographically confused. My cousin from a small town in Georgia got a job offer in the tri-state area. He called me, very concerned. "I don't know if I should take it," he said. I looked it up, and it's New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I can't afford to live in 3 different states at once. How would I even pay taxes? Do I need 3 different driver's licenses? He thought he was being hired to work in a bizarre, overlapping sovereign zone and would have to commute between 3 separate legal systems daily. I once worked with a woman who was planning a family vacation. She told me her family wanted to see Mount Rushmore and the Statue of Liberty. She had booked a hotel for a week in Rapid City, South Dakota, and called me for advice. "So how many days should we set aside for the bus tour to New York?" she asked. "I'm hoping we can get there and back in a single day, so we don't have to book another hotel." She was absolutely floored when I showed her on a map that her bus tour would be a 2,000-mile cross-country journey. A guy on my college dorm floor was from Southern California and had never seen snow. He decided to go on a ski trip with some friends to Lake Tahoe. He called his mum to tell her. I overheard his side of the conversation. "No, Mum, it's fine." "Yes, I know it's in Nevada." "No, I don't need my passport." "I know it's a different state, but it's not a different country." "Mum, please, you do not need a passport to go to Nevada." He later told me his mum was convinced that leaving California required international travel documents. My company's headquarters is in Chicago. We had a new hire from Arizona who was looking for an apartment. He told our HR manager he wanted to live on the coast. The HR manager, confused, said, "Chicago is in the Midwest. We're about 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean." The new hire got frustrated and said, "But it's on Lake Michigan." "I saw the pictures. It has beaches and everything. You have a coast. I want to live there." He refused to believe that a coast didn't automatically mean salt water and sharks. I was on a flight to Anchorage, Alaska, sitting next to a man who was clearly a first-time visitor. He was nervously looking out the window as we flew over the vast, snowy wilderness of Canada. He turned to me and whispered, "I hope I filled out my customs forms correctly. I get so nervous about the international stuff." I smiled and told him, "Don't worry, Alaska is a US state. There's no customs." He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Really? But we're flying over another country to get there. Are you sure that's legal?" A friend of mine from Florida was adamant that Key West was the southernmost point of the entire United States. I mentioned that Hawaii is much further south. He got very defensive and said Hawaii doesn't count. It's a chain of islands in the middle of nowhere. Key West is the southernmost point of real America, the part you can actually drive to. He had created a mental distinction between road-accessible America and the rest of the country. We had an intern from a very small town in Kansas who was working in our Boston office. One weekend, he told everyone he was going to walk to the next state over. We thought he meant Rhode Island, which was still a very long walk. He came back Monday, exhausted and disappointed. He had tried to walk to Vermont. "I walked north for 8 hours," he said, "and never even saw the border. States are way too big out here. Back home, you can drive through 3 states in an afternoon." I was at a bar trivia night, and the final question was, what is the only US state capital that is inaccessible by road? The other team, full of confidence, wrote down Honolulu, Hawaii. The correct answer was Juneau, Alaska. They argued with the host for 10 minutes, insisting that Hawaii was the only logical answer. Their main point was, how can a city in Alaska be inaccessible by road? It's connected to Canada, which has roads. It makes no sense. It's a trick question. They couldn't comprehend the sheer scale and wildness of Alaska. My aunt from Idaho was helping her son with a school project about the Mississippi River. She called me, completely stumped. "I'm looking at this map," she said, "and the river goes all the way down the middle of the country." So, what I don't get is the eastern half the United States and the western half is, like, a territory? Or is it the other way around? When did they decide to split the country in half with a river? She thought the Mississippi was an official dividing line between 2 separate administrative regions of the USA. I met a guy who was planning a bachelor party in New Orleans. He told me his grand plan was to rent an RV in San Diego and drive the whole group there. He said, "It'll be epic. We'll just follow the coast the whole way down. We can stop at beaches in Mexico on the way." I had to be the one to break the news to him that not only is New Orleans on a completely different body of water, the Gulf of Mexico, not the Pacific, but that his proposed route would involve driving through a different country and then several thousand miles across Texas. A co-worker was complaining about a package she was waiting for. "It's been 2 weeks," she said. "It's coming from Puerto Rico." I mentioned that shipping from there can sometimes take a while. She slammed her hand on her desk. "This is what's wrong with our country. We can get packages from China in 3 days, but we can't even manage to get a package from a neighboring country like Puerto Rico in under a month. We should just annex them already so they can use our postal service." I just quietly said, "They do use our postal service." My friend from New York City was applying for a job in Austin. He called me to ask for advice. "So I'm looking at apartments," he said, "and I found a really cheap one in this place called Waco. It says it's only 100 miles away. In New York, that's like a weekend trip, so the commute should be about an hour and a half, right?" I had to break it to him that 100 miles in Texas, with its vast open highways, is still a 100-mile drive and not a magical short distance. He thought the state's size would somehow compress the travel time. In a college astronomy class, the professor was explaining how light pollution affects stargazing. A student from a major city raised her hand and said, "I don't think that's a real problem in America. I mean, maybe in small states like Rhode Island, but most of the country is empty, right? Like, Once you get past the Appalachians, isn't it just dark until you hit California? She genuinely pictured the entire central two-thirds of the United States as an uninhabited, unlit void with no cities, towns, or even streetlights. I was on a tour boat on Lake Superior in Minnesota. A tourist from Arizona was talking to the guide. "This is beautiful," she said, "but I'm a little nervous being out on the open water like this." "How far are we from the Canadian coast?" The guide explained that we were in a bay and the Canadian border was about 20 miles north. The woman gasped and said, "So we're in international waters. Do we need to show our passports if their coast guard stops us?" She thought crossing the watery border of a lake was the same as arriving at an international airport. My company transferred an employee from our San Diego office to our headquarters in Boise, Idaho. He was excited, telling everyone, "I can't wait to spend my weekends in Canada. I'll just pop over the border whenever I want." We had to show him on a map that while Idaho does border Canada, Boise is in the southern part of the state, a solid 7-hour drive from the border. He was crushed. "But it's a northern state," he argued. "The border should be right there. That's just poor state planning." I had a roommate in college from a wealthy part of Connecticut who had never travelled west of Pennsylvania. We were watching a documentary about Yellowstone National Park. When the geyser Old Faithful erupted on screen, she asked, "Wow, is that man-made? It's amazing how they timed the water pressure to do that. It must be connected to the Hoover Dam or something, right?" She could not be convinced that it was a natural geothermal feature and not an elaborate government-funded water fountain. A man called into a local radio show I was listening to, complaining about traffic. He said, "The problem is we have too many states. It's ridiculous. We should just consolidate them." We could have one big state called the Midwest, another called New England. It would simplify all the laws and we wouldn't need all these redundant governments. He was completely serious, proposing to dissolve centuries of history and culture for the sake of a more streamlined roadmap in his head. I was at a party talking to a girl who had just moved to Chicago. She mentioned she was from the East Coast. I asked, "Oh, cool, which state?" She looked at me blankly and said, "I don't know, the one with the beaches and the big cities." I think it's just called the East Coast. She had lived there for 20 years and genuinely thought the entire eastern seaboard was a single massive state, and that places like New York, Florida, and Massachusetts were just cities within it. My uncle from rural Tennessee was visiting us in Salt Lake City, Utah. We took him to see the Great Salt Lake. He stared at it for a while, then turned to me and asked, "So, which ocean is this?" "The Pacific?" I explained. It was a terminal lake with no outlet, and its saltiness came from mineral deposits. He shook his head in disbelief. "That's not possible," he said. "All big bodies of water are oceans. You're telling me this giant thing just sits here? I think the government is hiding a secret canal to the sea." A customer at the rental car agency where I worked wanted to rent a car in El Paso, Texas. He told me his plan was to drive up the coast to visit his friend in Denver, Colorado. I had to pull out a map and show him that not only is El Paso not on a coast, but Colorado is a landlocked state, and his drive would be entirely through the desert and mountains of New Mexico. He was flabbergasted. "But it's west. Everything west is on the coast," he insisted. I was a camp counselor for a program with kids from all over the country. A kid from Nevada was telling a kid from Vermont about seeing the Grand Canyon. The Vermont kid asked, "Is that one of the 7 wonders of the world?" The Nevada kid confidently replied, "No, it's one of the 4 corners of the world. That's why it's so important." He had conflated the 4 Corners Monument with the 7 Wonders and created a new, geographically nonsensical category of global landmarks. My friend was excited about her new job, which allowed her to work remotely. She told me, "I'm going to move to Hawaii. I'll keep my East Coast hours, so I'll start work at 3 a.m. and be done by 11 a.m. every day. I'll have the whole afternoon to surf." I had to gently point out that while she would be done early, the sun wouldn't even rise until a few hours into her workday. She had never considered that the time difference also meant a difference in daylight hours. I overheard a conversation in a coffee shop where a man was trying to convince his friend to move to Wyoming. He said, "It's the perfect place. No people, lots of space, and you're right on the border with America." His friend asked what he meant. He explained, "Well, Wyoming is so empty, it's practically its own country, like Canada. But it's close enough that you can drive into America whenever you need to go to, like, a real store in Colorado." He viewed his own country's least populous state as a foreign wilderness. A woman on a flight to Portland, Oregon, was looking at the flight map on the screen in front of her. She saw the plane's path went over states like Wyoming and Idaho. She called the flight attendant over and asked, with genuine concern, "Excuse me, I thought this was a domestic flight. Why are we flying over all these other countries to get to Oregon?" The flight attendant had to reassure her that all the land masses they were flying over were in fact still the United States. My history professor told us a story about a student who, in a paper about the Louisiana Purchase, wrote that it was a strategically brilliant move because it gave the US complete control of the Panama Canal. The student had not only misplaced the Panama Canal by about 2,000 miles, but also had it being built 100 years too early. He had simply associated major American water-based purchase with the most famous canal he could think of, regardless of geography or timeline.